Now, it will be a great pleasure to introduce our esteemed speakers today. And before I forget, we are recording, and yes, we will be sending out a copy of that recording in just a few days. So first, please meet Emily Leach, founder of the Freelance Conference. Emily has been called a pioneer in the freelance world. She started a Facebook group back in 2014 to connect freelancers, and that burgeoned into what's now called the Freelance Conference. Also, she has founded the Texas Freelance Association, and she has expanded her events into a virtual and national Freelance Business Week, which is the third week of April. MBO has been a frequent sponsor of these events, and we love working with Emily and hearing her perspective. I have one question for each of our panelists as we introduce people today. Emily, if you were filling out a new community profile, what are 3 things that you would put in your bio to tell people more about yourself?
That's always a crazy question to me, because I do get it quite often. Is one of the first things is to really think about what you want people to see. I mean, this is a short snippet that people are usually seeing in a quick profile. So instead of just saying what your title is, I would spend a little bit of time, think about like search engine optimization. Make your title not only digestible, but interesting to the person that is potentially reading that. Definitely make sure you put some time into your bio, make it interesting. Maybe even, make it a little bit fun. This is a place to, I don't know if I'd go as far as saying, get edgy, but, definitely make sure that people, when they're reading it, they're engaged and want to read to the next line. I mean, it really is. We look at a bio as, it almost brings out the corporate in all of us, regardless of how, freelancey or whatever you want to call yourself, but have some fun with that bio, because that really is a place for you to show your who you are as well as your experience. And the third thing is, make sure you have a good headshot. This is not a place to put a headshot of your dog or your cat, as beautiful and amazing as those two things may be. It's an opportunity for you to show you. That picture says a million words, and in your profile, it really, really does.
Excellent. And if there's anything that you would share in your bio that's fun about yourself, any fun facts you want to share with the audience?
Mine is usually about all the stuff that I like to do. I love four-wheeling. It really shows that I have this adventurous side to myself. I love to do whitewater kayaking, and I drive a Jeep. So any chance I get to go off road, I definitely do that. And I love to sail. I row individual sculls, things like that kind of give people a feel for who you are as a human being.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Emily.
Thanks.
Next, I'd like everyone to meet Maria Ogniva, who is Director of Online Experience and Community at FinancialForce. Before joining FinancialForce, Maria was the Global Head of Community at LinkedIn, and she's also headed community initiatives at companies like Sumo Logic, Sidecar Technologies, and Salesforce. She's an experienced community, content, and social strategist, a passionate and prolific writer and speaker, and believes in making work and play better with technology. We are so happy to have you, Maria. Thanks for joining us today. And I'll ask you the same thing I asked Emily. What are 3 things you would add if you were filling out a community profile for the first time? Tips or about yourself, whichever you'd prefer.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm so delighted to be here. So I would say, on the business side, I would say my 3 things are community builder. That's really my chosen career, my vocation, something I love. I'm so lucky. I've been doing it for over a decade. I'm customer centric. You can't really be a community builder if you're not. And then I would say I'm also a bit of a risk taker and an entrepreneur. If you want, because community work does require that you're often pivoting your strategy, that you're adapting to customer needs. And so people usually, when they need a creative strategy, come to me. So I'm all about taking smart risks, measuring the impact, and sticking with what works from those experiments. My 3 fun facts, kind of personal facts. I was born in Russia, so English is not my first language. My favorite thing to do kind of pre-COVID was to travel. I was well on my way to 40 countries before 40. But then I also had a child. So I have a little 5-year-old boy. So traveling took a little bit of a backseat. But now that he's older, I look forward to showing him the world that I love discovering. And I live in Denver. And so, what they say when in Rome, I started skiing. So I started teaching myself how to ski. So it's been my second year on the slopes, and I'm not good at it, but I absolutely love it. So back to you.
Oh my gosh, Maria. Well, you're braver than I am. I tried to learn to ski as an adult and realized I was a lot further from the ground than I thought I was going to be, and falling hurts, even on snow. But anybody who knows me knows one of my 3 fun facts is I'm a lefty and I'm incredibly uncoordinated at everything, as many lefties are. So there's that. Next, let's meet Miles Everson. Most people know that Miles needs no introduction. He's our Chief Executive Officer. But for those who are unfamiliar, Miles joined MBO in 2019 after serving as the Global Advisory and Consulting CEO for PwC, where he led the company's Asia Pacific Americas advisory and consulting businesses. So, Miles, question to you. What are you going to add to your community profile?
So a few things, and first, thanks to all the panelists for being here and for the people attending. So I'll be a bit quick, but first of all, obviously, professionally, what are you good at? What's your talent? And I think my primary talent, and this came from a client of mine once that I'd worked for about a decade, was that I'm good at taking complexity and breaking it down in a way that you can actually get change to get driven through an organization. Because people kind of freeze in the face of uncertainty. And so when you break down complexity, you can actually get some traction. On the personal side, kind of 3 things there. I've summited Kilimanjaro. I've been on 6 of the 7 continents in the world, and I've seen 4 of the 7 natural wonders of the world. So I got some work to do to get to the last 3. And then I hang my shingle, if you will, in Austin, Texas with my wife, Julie. So that's I'll stop there. I could keep going and stuff, but that's a good rundown.
You kept it at the top of the facts list here. I know you could go more, but I want to get over to Jake McKee, the community guy. And I'm not saying I'm saving the best for last, but I am saving one of my favorites for last, although I love everybody on this panel. Jake is the founder of Community 5, a consultancy focused on helping organizations assess, design, and optimize their online communities and fan engagement programs. He has worked for some truly fantastic companies, including one of his own that he sold to PwC in 2012. And he has previously run communities for both Apple and Lego, both truly iconic brands. Jake is going to be assisting with the moderation of today's panel. So Jake, I'm going to turn it over to you for the same question. Tell us what you'd add to your community profile. And you're probably going to want to come off mute.
Oh, sorry about that. I think, boy, I'd have to start by, my first descriptor would be not as cool as Miles. That's some good list of fun there. So, I'm going to move quickly through mine because otherwise I'll be long-winded about the joys of community and how important it is. And what we just saw was actually some community building amongst the group here. So, I know more about even most people that I've known before. But the funny thing is as I was thinking about this, my 3 keywords, my 3 tags were dad to a teenager. Yes, I'm rolling my eyes when I say that, and photographer and food nerd, because I feel like especially these days with so much COVID for so long, those were kind of the 3 things I was doing most of my life on outside of work. So, but I always think these exercises are fun from a community standpoint, just because of the reminder that community is about people, and it is about storytelling, and it is about connection. And you don't get any one of those 3 without the other 2. It's real hard to connect to somebody if you're not telling each other stories, and if you're not really connecting on a personal human level. So it may have seemed like an interesting activity that had a lot of content, but I think it's important as we start talking about community and creating cultures of communities. Who are the people we're creating with?
Excellent. Thanks, Jake. Now, I know you and Miles know each other from days at PwC. So do you guys mind start talking about how you guys get to know each other? And maybe, Miles, you could kick us off with some of the ways that we're talking about building community here at MBO Partners.
Yeah, great. So, yeah, Jake and I met each other. It was about 10 years ago. At the time, PwC, their consulting business, we wanted to get into the customer experience and design business, and we weren't in it. And Jake and a few of his co-founders had gotten started with a really cool business down in, I guess it'd be North Lamar or South Lamar, I don't remember anymore, Jake, in Austin. And they were doing some really awesome stuff for clients. And so they joined PwC, and Jake and I both, he left a couple of years before I did, and then I left, and now we continue to do some business together, and we're obviously here today. So we kind of came from two different ends of the spectrum. He came from a creative side of his business, and I came out of an accounting firm. So who would ever imagine that an accountant and creative would match up? So that's the power of personal connection. When I think about today, there's a few things going on, and this is about primarily how do you build a sense of community in, your workforce and your future workforce. And so a couple of the trends that are happening and things that have happened in the past is, number one is, during the financial crisis in 2007 and 8, I was busy doing financial service work, and we learned, it just became evidence, I guess, or confirmatory, that the amount of value that humans were putting on their virtual communities was extremely high. And I say that because a lot of the defaults were occurring in home mortgages. And 30 years ago, it would have been an embarrassment to default on your home mortgage. So it was the bill you always paid. But during the crisis, we saw people default on mortgages on their phones, but they weren't defaulting on their connectivity, their phone bill, and being able to be connected to their virtual community, because the relative importance of my online virtual community, social community, was so important that you wanted to make sure that you stayed connected to it. And then, now you see with what's happened with COVID, obviously people have gotten a lot more used to working, and not just working, living in a kind of remote, less human direct interaction. And so I think as you sit back today and you say, well, what does it mean in our business here at MBO? We're connecting independents so that they can make their livelihood, they can do the work they love the way they want and have control to do that. And I would say it's probably the second most important thing to independence is to have some sense of community, because it can be really lonely when you're an independent. Whereas when you're a full-time employee, you have a bit more of a structured community to be around. So when you don't have that as an independent, it's really important for companies to help fill that, because from a company perspective, if you think that you can drive, be competitive, and win going forward by having just a full-time captive employee base, you're kidding yourselves. Because the most valuable companies on the planet today have massively extended workforces that they're leveraging, and they're building communities. So just think of on this call, the other three panelists have worked for some of those companies. Jake did work at Apple, Emily did work at Facebook, Maria did work at LinkedIn, Salesforce, FinancialForce. All of those are extremely valuable, creating companies, and they've done it, and community is important to all of those. So I think there's a business reason and there's a human interest reason here to really dial in on how do you make communities work. So I think we'll have a really good conversation. Maybe I'll flip it to Jake if you want to pick up on. He's going to kind of drive us a little bit here today, and we'll chime in as we go through it. So, and we'll take questions. If you got a question, just fire it up on the chat, and we'll make sure that we get those answered right away. We're happy to flex with what's of interest to people.
Yeah, and Miles, I think the point about it touching a lot of different parts of the business too, lots of different types of businesses, is an interesting one. And we've seen we're gonna be talking a long time about the impacts of COVID and what it's done to the community dynamics. And there are a great many PhD papers in process, if not ready to get started, on what's happened in the last year, because in a lot of ways, it kind of broke our bubble of belief about what people are really interested in, what they really want, what they're willing to put up with, the value of both having the flexibility to work at home and not have to drive back and forth to an office, and the desire to get the hell out of the house and drive back and forth to an office, right? And I think that we're all sort of trying to figure out now, where do we go from here, and what's the what's the reality of what's happened now that we're starting to reemerge and back into the world a little bit. I'm Emily, I'm really curious what you're seeing from the freelance crowd, because I do find a lot of people saying, well, I'm having conversations about new gigs, new full-time jobs with companies who just don't want me to move somewhere in the middle of COVID. Even they were saying, no, we're still wanting you to move. And hearing a number of those sort of stories about people saying, no, I'm going a different direction. But also, by the same token, freelancing is fun when you can offset it by going out to beers with your coworkers. What happens when you can't do that? Maybe a job's not so bad, right? So is this a blip where we're going to see it even out, or what are you seeing with the freelance community in general, as far as where we go from here?
I would say that I feel like I am so steeped in freelancing. I mean, I'm going on my 30th year of running a freelance business. So I may have a skewed position on that, because I surround myself by people that live the same sort of lifestyle. And when you run a freelance business, you are the business and you are your life. And so most of us find a way to integrate the two. And it's not so much that they run side by side as your business and your life literally, kind of does this. Mm-hmm. And what the things that I saw change the most in running a freelance business and chatting with other people that were running them in, my communities and things like that, was that they actually felt like it was easier. A lot of running the business became easier because more of our clients knew how to use Zoom that they didn't know how to use before. They began to learn how to use some of these tools. And because they were having to use project management tools and communication tools with their staff, that it actually made it easier to work with your freelancers. And so in a lot of ways, it made our world more, what is the word I'm looking for? More seamless. And the one thing that it did kind of take away from us, like you said, was going out and having coffee and things like that. And so it's what I find kind of interesting right now is, you're right, a lot of people are like going, oh, things are starting to open up. We can go back to, do I want to? Do I need to? Maybe this new normal, if you will, isn't really that bad. And I was just looking for what I used to have because I was used to having it. And now I'm used to having this. And finding out what the new integration is going to be is a question that we're asking ourselves. There was a reason why we needed to separate from each other for health reasons and things like that. So maybe we need to find a way forward that keeps some of that distance, yet still allows us to come back together and chat face to face, because like I said, it's a human piece, it's a human element that we do need. So where when we have another pandemic, I believe that we will at some point in the future, it isn't so we don't have the backlash that we had this time, because our lives are more designed to be able to manage it better. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And Jason put in the comments that he's surprised it's still taken this long for us to figure out what comes next. But on one hand, yes, I think there's a lot of companies that are just for far too long, and maybe even still are sort of saying, well, we'll just figure out how to get back to normal, la, 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 fingers in the ears. But I also think that there's been some stages to the pandemic too, that, if you look at the last year or so, there's been at least 3 or 4 or 5 stages of where we're at, right? And when we were starting this time last year, everybody was just like, don't even think about it, just go home. Well, that's very different than what we're dealing with now, which is, well, how do we come back out? How do we do that safely? What are the social dynamics? And I think the one thing that I think is important is to remember that we are on a path that is so uncertain and relatively quick, right? We're talking about a couple of month cycles. And I think Jason's point is a good one, not because we haven't solved the overall issues, but I think because we haven't really said as a industry, as industries, as cultures, as business cultures, how do we start thinking about community culture, community dynamics, social dynamics inside our companies in a much better way, from everybody, from diversity and inclusion down to marketing, down to support. I mean, everybody involved has these different dynamics. What can we do remotely? Where does it help? How do we get past some of our hangups that we've had in the past about security? And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, being forced to use Teams with some of my clients, and Teams was not in the same spot it was now, but it was the right thing to do because they're a Microsoft shop, right? Well, that wasn't the right answer either at that time. So, Maria, I'm curious, on the financial side too, especially, there's a whole lot of different dynamics. I feel like, when you have to schedule an appointment to go to the Wells Fargo branch, maybe we just don't need to be going to the Wells Fargo branch. What else can I do remotely? But weigh in here on the community dynamics, and I bring up the financial side, but maybe you have a broader view too.
That's a good question. So from a community perspective, we have definitely seen a huge growth in like how our customers are utilizing our community. So our community is primarily online, but we had an offline element, of course, where we had user groups and people could get together and kind of talk about best practices and how to be successful. Obviously, that is no longer happening. We're still doing kind of like real-time meetings, but obviously everything's on Zoom. But we've definitely seen a huge rise in people wanting to connect. And it wasn't just because people were like stuck at home and had nothing to do. I think people's jobs have fundamentally shifted, right? How our customers work with their customers has changed. And so people's jobs, the content of their jobs, not just where they did their jobs in the office versus at home, but the content of their jobs and kind of how businesses run their operations have changed dramatically. And so in times of great shift and in times of great uncertainty, where you go is your community. And so I feel like it's really been a boon kind of for the community industry in that way. I often wonder about what happens when we all go back in person. I think there is like a certain magic to being able to meet digitally in real time, but like not just with people in your town. I really do hope that conferences, for example, are able to retain some kind of a hybrid model where we're able to really attract and stream content to just a much wider group of people, right? Like our user conference at FinancialForce like got bigger, and now all of a sudden, people from all over the world can attend. Whereas before, like you had to get on a plane, you had to go to Vegas. Not everyone can afford that. Not everyone has that in their budget. So all of a sudden, it's just a lot more equitable. And also like the voices that you can bring in, again, like not everybody is just able to drop everything they're doing and get on a plane. And so there are conferences that I've attended as an attendee. I've been able to cover a lot more ground, right? Instead of being able, you can only go to so many in-person things, right? Just because of money, and also like you can't be in two cities at once, right? And so, but now like all of a sudden I can even go to 2 conferences in the same week, if the time allows, right? And so I think as I think about what's next, I really hope that we don't throw out the proverbial baby with the bathwater and just do everything in person again, that we think about it from that lens, and really think about how we can use what we've learned in this time of not being together, but being together on the internet, how we can apply that to make things more widely accessible, more interesting, and more equitable.
Yeah, Emily, I know you run a conference. I'm curious, how you have to be,
please don't talk.
yeah, weigh in here.
I definitely want to, because I'm glad you brought that up, Maria, because it's like, there's been years, many years, I've been in this event space. I used to design TEDx events back in Albuquerque and down in Corpus Christi, Texas. And one of the things that we kept playing with is, how do we incorporate those that can't make it in person so that it is an experience for them, and it isn't watching, talking heads, and some of it was technology wasn't quite there. This last year has forced technology to open up some of those other concepts and ways of engaging with each other, on top of the fact that so many people have had to actually go do it, that now they know how to use the tools. So it was kind of both sides, right? The technology wasn't completely there. We didn't have enough people that knew how to use the tools, that they would use the tools. So it always felt like, no matter how hard we tried to integrate the in-person with the virtual always got the bad end of the stick. So I'm actually super excited that as we move into these hybrid conferences, we're looking at probably still doing the Freelance Conference virtual this year, but just for safety reasons and a lot of other things. But we'll see where that ends, and then 2022 will absolutely be a hybrid event. So I think it all boils down to experience, and the tools bringing the opportunity for that experience to allow more of these hybrid spaces to open up.
So let's switch gears here then a second. So lots of really good stuff happening, lots of interest. We're seeing massive amounts of community job openings pop up all over the place. That's an interesting sub-subject that we'll get into later. But so a company has gone through this process of COVID. They've seen their employees go virtual. They've tried to keep them connected to each other. They've been working on virtual events. Maria, if they were going to start with a strategic process to figure out, okay, now that we're re-emerging, we need to put some energy into making sure that we're not just whack-a-moling this, where would they start?
Where would a company start with their community initiative?
Yeah, and how it relates to not just the sort of the outbound community, like we think of communities, but also their internal community.
Yeah, so I think there's so many different flavors of community, right? There's employee community, there's freelancer community, which is kind of in between a customer and an employee. There's customer community, there's user communities who are not even your customers. There are passion communities, like there are all kinds of communities. How to start really depends on like your end goal. Like, what are you trying to do with this community? And by the way, just because everyone's doing it is like not a great reason at all. So if that's what you're trying to do, I'm gonna like coax you off the ledge. And maybe you don't need a community. Maybe you're not ready for it, and that's fine too. But I would posit that most businesses can really benefit from that way of working and that way of relating, helping people to relate to each other in a networked way. It makes your business a lot stronger. It helps you think about things in a very different way. And just be like just a lot more agile and successful. So the very first thing I would do if I was starting from scratch, first of all, I would ask myself, like, who's this community for? Secondly, like, what are my goals? Why am I starting this, right? So maybe if you are like a product organization, whether it's tech or consumer products, and your goal is to really like let people know about your products and how people are using your products and how much fun they're having with your products. That's a marketing community. Like potentially that's part of your marketing strategy, right? Where you're offering a bit of that social proof, right? You're closing deals, you're helping move your customers if it's B2B, through the funnel. it's gonna look very different. You're probably gonna need a very different set of technology than you would for like a support community. So you think through that, right? If you're a product company looking to kind of augment your support with like peer-to-peer kind of question and answer, and really lean into like self-serve, so you can like scale your business in a very authentic, but also like very impactful way. Like, right, that's your community is going to look very different. You're going to be meeting very different KPIs. And so as you're thinking about like what your community is for, what your goals are, what your use cases are, I always recommend like to really start with like 1 or 2 use cases, really nail those. All the decisions that you will make will really come from that. Platform selection should never come first. Like that you want to kind of decide like what you're doing and how you're doing it, and like kind of what your roadmap could look like, and then you start talking about platforms. And then also how you're going to measure it, right? Because at the back end of every initiative, that includes community, you need to be able to say, this was successful, this was not successful, this strategy or this program that we're applying to community worked or didn't work. As you remember in my bio, I said I experiment a lot. If you can't measure your experiments, whether they're large experiments or small experiments, it's like, why even do the experiments, right? So like you need to constantly understand what is happening and how what you're doing is impacting your business, and like the way that you execute your community, whether you start on Facebook or LinkedIn, or you build like an online community that's on your own domain, your tooling should be able to allow you to measure the impact that you are bringing to the company. And then, yeah, go ahead.
So Miles, talking about impact, you're seeing, you talk to a lot of businesses and a lot of organizations, a lot of freelancers for that matter, throughout the course of a day. Talk to me about impact and what they're looking for at this point in the world.
Yeah, so I'm gonna first make what I believe is an important distinction, and it's easy to kind of confuse when you're thinking about community and what you want to do with it. So I'll get to your impact point. So I think it's really important to be crystal clear that there's a difference between a cohort and a community. A cohort is a group of people with common characteristics that I can measure. A cohort can become a community, but a community is where the members feel like they belong and they care for each other. So you can define a cohort and not get a community. And I think the challenge in the world of the worker and companies trying to attract the best workers in the world are you confusing cohort for community? So you say, I'm going to create a community of everybody that lives in a certain area, makes a certain amount of money, has a certain skill type. Well, if you bring that cohort together and they don't care for each other and they don't feel like they have a sense of belonging, you don't have a community, you have a cohort. It's much more clinical. The community has an emotional component to it that extends well beyond kind of traditional business mindset of how I think about the economics of my business. And so when you think of the impact, you want to win the hearts and minds, as well as winning the economics that come with that. And I think for companies to do that, frankly, I mean, Emily, you are effectively a community organizer from the ground level up with FreeCon. People come to you because they want to be there, they belong, which is different than I defined a community and therefore it's a community. The community has to be embraced by the membership. When I say members, I'm like the people who are part of the community. That's how I see it, Jake. And so the impact is both it's not just the concrete hard dollar numbers, it's also do people feel like they really belong, and do they care for one another? When you do that, you'll get the economic benefits on the backside.
Yeah, and I love that cohort versus community. And I even think that there's big cohorts and there's small communities too, right?
Sure.
There's lots of stages in between, because you could have to your point, there's a really interesting dynamic that might happen where I just don't like the cohort. right? I show up, I do my work. I may or may not have a need to connect with them. There's no purpose to that. And let's be honest, I know we can all sort of speak to this in some form or fashion, but building community is hard. It's expensive and it takes some time. You don't just, even in the cohort model, you still do an icebreaker, right? We did an icebreaker this morning just to kind of get us flowing, right?
Right.
And most of us know each other in some form or fashion, right? We still have to kind of get into the mood, much less to do something that's going to last and be adding business value 6 months or 6 years from now. So I think that's an interesting way to think about the cohort on one end and the community on the other. And there's lots of stages in between. And to Maria's point, what's the goal? How much do you want to push this? Where do you put investment in and how much investment? But understanding if you want something more than just a random group of people doing some random work together, you're going to have to put some energy into that. You're going to have to put some emotional energy into that, not just business energy, right?
Yes,
Yeah, and I do think, yeah, go ahead, Emily, sorry.
Oh, to that point, I was going to say, so Austin Freelance Gigs is where everything started for me. And now we have just over 11,000 people in there. And to Maria's point is, what did I want to come out of that? And for me, it wasn't a financial goal as much as I wanted to create a space that freelancers could come and interact with one another, but people that were looking for expert freelance help could come and find it on a very local level. And it grew, but it took not only me being in there and literally feeding some of the gigs in the beginning for people to find it. So I was going and finding people and projects and putting them in there, but it was the rules that we created, right? No self-promotion, no sales. We're not here to sell to each other. We are each other's community, and I'm not your target market. And so rules are really important and have to be applied. You can't just say this person can do it and that person can't. It's across the board.
Absolutely. I would also say, Miles, I love the point that you made, the cohort versus community. I would say that how you define the group of people that you want to come to your community actually could be instrumental in creating a community or not, right? So you want to think about what are people's goals? So one of the questions that you guys prepared for this talk is what makes a community focused company, right? What are the brands that are doing it well? And one of the examples you listed is Peloton. And I really like that example because even though I'm actually not sure how well they do community, they're a brand that, for example, kind of cracked the nut on what do I need now, right? Bringing like-minded people together. I want to get fit. But then also it's not just the goal of today, but it's my larger goal. I want to get fit. I want to do this class and have fun in it, but why? Right. And so it's that whole concept of 5 whys. You want to get really good at asking what do this group of people that I want to bring together, want to convene in my community, what do they need? Why, right? And that helps you get to the part of us that's a part of our identity, right? Let's say the freelancer community, you want to bring people together so that they're successful being freelancers. Why? So they can make money. Why do they want to make money? So they can have the financial freedom and they can care for their family. So you kind of always want to peel back the onion and really design kind of your member journeys around that. And also that will tell you how to cast your net as far as inviting people, and whom you invite is actually just as important sometimes as whom you don't invite. Because for your community to be a really, really the kind of community that Miles talked about, there has to be a purpose. There has to be a sense of belonging. And so that sometimes means knowing how to exclude certain groups. It cannot be an everything for everyone kind of thing, right? Yeah. And so I think being able to kind of blend, why do I want to build this community versus what do my customers need or what do my members need? why do they need that? Why do they need this other thing? And kind of building this almost like a Maslow's pyramid of hierarchy of needs, and really understanding that helps you build that community where people do belong and they're participating, not just like to get a quick answer to a question, but it is part of their identity, right? Like the way that they behave in there, the way that they kind of meet to the challenge of working together, learning from each other, that should be very much like part of their identity. And if you can crack that nut, that's when you get community instead of a cohort.
Yeah, that identity piece is so crucial, because if you can get the identity piece in place, you're much less likely to lose somebody to another company, because this is my team. I have defined myself as part of this team. You're also able to get much more enthusiasm and excitement, and therefore productivity out of their work, because again, it's who they are, it's what they want to do. You don't want to let down your team, right? And you know, the mantra I've had for 20 years of building community projects is everybody goes home happy. And I know McLean's heard me say this, I know Maria's heard me say it, I know Miles heard me say it, so Emily, you know, you're hearing it for the first time. But the idea is that there's an exchange here, right? That I have to understand as the company what the members want, need, and are really excited about, and they have to know I understand it. And by the same token, they have to understand what I need, and I need to be brave enough to say, from a business standpoint, here's what I need. And what's funny is that business people often you kind of skip the 5 whys. I love that, Maria. You know, they get the 1 why. Well, they're engineers. They want to get help from other engineers on how to design things. No, that's part of it, but they also want to get that support, the connection, the identity piece of, you know, we're all here working on stuff that's hard, and that feels good I can't go home and talk to my wife about quantum mechanics, but I sure can talk to other quantum mechanics industry people about how hard this is. But business people also get really hesitant to say, here's what we need out of this deal. Right. But I came up with this mantra at Lego because I kept saying, I'd get on stage and I'd announce a new product and I'd say, hey, if you like these things, help us sell them, talk it up, promote it. And they did, and we sold them, and then we could make more of them. Right. And I made that very clear that what it is I was trying to get out of this. But I also coupled that with a very clear definition of my understanding of what the community side wanted. So that they couldn't come back and say, well, geez, you don't even get me. Why am I supposed to help you if you don't even understand me? So it's a real everybody goes home happy mantra, right? It's got to have both sides of that, and both sides have to be open and honest about it for it to work.
Jake, you know, we have a lot of people on the not on the panel, but in the audience today, who are not necessarily in community-facing roles, and so I'd like to ask a question of you and of the
Sure.
community experts here in the group, which is, as these people are thinking about community is interesting, maybe I want to start one at my company, what are maybe 3 things that they could think about to make the business case to their greater teams, their executive level peers, about how and what they can expect to get from a community? You know, what are some maybe 3 things they should consider before starting it?
Yeah, Emily, start us off. You did really good with the 3 things earlier. So you clearly think in 3 bullet points like I do. Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So thank you very much. I was about to raise my hands like, I want to do this. I want to do this. I think if you're going into it, asking yourself, what can I get out of it? You probably shouldn't start a community, because it already kind of shows that you probably don't have the mindset that you might need to create an effective community. I would change that question around and say, what would trying to articulate this, how would our company be better off, or our customers, if it's, you know, customer facing, how would they be better off if we had a community that was safe, that was engaging, that they, you know, brought the customers together? And going back to what Maria was saying earlier, why do they want to be together? What are they going to take away from that? And it's how do we become an integrated part of that conversation, and culture that we're creating. And that's, I think the whole title of this was the culture of community, if I remember correctly. And you have to be able to embody that culture before you can get your community to reflect that culture. And so if you go into it wondering what I'm going to get out of it, then I don't know if you're going to be very successful at creating that culture. So I don't know if I did three things.
I love it.
I thought you had a great
Maria or Miles, weigh in.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of get it directly towards this balance of the total workforce, right? So I think of many, not I think I know from conversations that many freelancers and independents, I'm going to say it's lonely because companies treat their employees very differently than they do the independents that are creating value for them. So the first question for me is, am I going to define my human capital assets through legal definitions of employee and contractor? Or am I going to define my human capital assets in a way that causes them to have loyalty and pick me? Everything else being equal, they would come to my company to do work than some other one. We happen to call that client of choice. And so that's a really important decision in my mind is what are you doing to make the independents feel like they are cared for and they belong? Because many of the most successful independents in the world, they only have half a dozen clients that they serve routinely. But yet in organizations, the structure, just the way they engage, they get treated like a transaction instead of a human and an asset, right? So HR has all kinds of special programs to make employees feel good. It's not the same way with independents at most companies. And so it's got to be a conscious decision. And, again, I'll get off my soapbox after this comment, but many highly talented people choose to be independents. And if you as a company choose to treat them like a transaction, you are cutting yourself off from a massively powerful asset to your company. And so you've got to change that mindset. And that should be part of, to me, maybe if there's an objective when you start with it, Emily, to me, the objective is, am I creating an environment where people feel like they're cared for and they have a sense of belonging here?
Agreed.
As opposed to something more mathematical.
Right. I've often said for years now that it's legal and HR are kind of the same beast in this particular story. But I've always said that legal's job is to reduce risk to zero. Business's job is to reduce risk as low as possible with reward as high as possible in a ratio you can defend. Those are two very different worlds and different mindsets and different approaches. And so often we don't remember that on the business side and fight for a ratio that we can defend. We just sort of ask the question, is it legal? Is it, from an HR standpoint, is it policy, whatever it might be? Oh, we can't do that? Cool, we're done now. Right. And it's the same thing as challenging your doctor when you go in and they say something odd and you're like, that doesn't sound right. Oh, I'm not, I don't have a medical degree. I can't ask that question. Yeah, you certainly can. You may be wrong, but you can certainly ask it and get more details for yourself. And I think that's one of the things that, from the business culture side that we really have to start doing a better job of is looking out for those freelancers and not just sort of saying, well, HR said that they're legally treated different. We can't invite them to the company Christmas party. Is that true, or is that just reduced risk to zero mindset, right? That's a whole different set of stories. So, Maria, Miles said the word lonely, and I, from a community manager standpoint, I know that word sings to you.
Yeah. So, ultimately, like that's the kind of the reason why people join communities, right? It's sure they may arrive there to get an answer to a question, but they stay for the community. We are inherently social creatures, just like biologically. And so our desire to be part of a group is like very, very primal. And that's why we have kind of like these remote emotions like fear and shame, right? They're designed to protect us and to keep us, like when we were hunting in groups and tribes, like you have to be part of a group, otherwise you get eaten by a lion, right? And so I think we kind of, that has, like, we no longer live amongst lions, but that psychology hasn't changed, right? We, even those of us who are introverted, like I'm a total introvert, but like you still yearn for community. And as I mentioned before, during times of change and kind of upheaval is when you really reach for your community. And so I think that really resonates. I think as much as you can help your customers, your partners, your freelance partners to feel part of something bigger beyond like the transactional thing that they maybe came there to do. That's really what it's about, you know?
Absolutely. Well, speaking of feeling less lonely, for everybody, where can we find you? Where can we keep up with you after the session ends here in just a couple of minutes? Emily?
I would say LinkedIn, Emily Leach. I can grab the link and get it put up there in the chat.
We can
Awesome.
toss
Maria?
everybody's profiles up.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, probably a good option for me as well. I'll put my address in the chat as well.
Yeah, I would say the same thing, Jake. LinkedIn is fine. I'm findable on Instagram.
Excellent.
Twitter as well.
Yeah, and I'm putting mine in the chat as well as we speak. Well, so as we wrap up here, I know we've only got a couple minutes left. McLean, jump in if we've got some questions we need to answer. But otherwise, I'm curious. What's your single takeaway quickie point? Mine is definitely this idea of the big cohorts and the small communities, versus the whole timeline of cohort community. That was a really fascinating insight. Miles, I'm gonna quiz you more on that offline
Sure.
as I write the book. The new book I'm working on. So we'll talk more about that one. But that was really a fascinating point. So thank you for that, Miles.
Yeah.
What was your takeaway from today?
Look, I think the takeaway is you have four of us on the phone together, where we all four are on the VC. We together we've never talked about community, and I think that we had a lot of play back and forth with one another, which is, I would say, to me, the primary takeaway is the need to be thoughtful about where are your communities where are they naturally forming? I mean, it came up in the chat too that a lot of times you have communities that are forming in your organizations or around your organizations naturally, right? So if you try to do too much structural rigidity around it, it's probably not going to fly.
Perfect. Love it.
Emily
Maria.
talked about some rules. Those are like governance, not nitty natty rules. They're governance level type rules. So
Cultural direction is always what I call it.
yeah.
Yeah, it gives the community, the place to decide if they fit there, if this is the place that they want to be. And once they buy into the governance, the rules, and they understand that they're there because it makes the space safe, and they then become the governing body. It's not a me, the voice of God is what we call it in the MN space, saying you're wrong, you're this, you're that. It just gives us our boundaries that we've all agreed to play within and live in this space in.
Maria, what about you?
My takeaway is that there are so many different flavors of community. Just look at the people on this call today. Our experiences are all so vastly different, but we're kind of bound by the humanity of it, right? Like the unit of each community is a person, right? You're bringing people together, and it's the same psychology that's at play. And if you can meet people's needs, like they will like whatever business goals you have, like you will meet them, but you also really have to understand like what people need. And that is true. Like if you strip away like everything, like the tactical piece of it, like how you do community, how you measure it, where it lives and all of that, what is the purpose? Like if you strip all that away, it's kind of the same. And so we all have more in common than not. That was my takeaway.
Awesome. All right, McLean, I'm handing it back to you to give us your takeaway and then close us out.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Jake. I really enjoyed listening to each of you guys today. I think what I've taken away from it is that there's a lot of different ways you can build community. And I particularly enjoyed, Miles, I'm going to sort of piggyback on what others have said, like the cohort versus community portion of it. I don't think you should mistake like-minded groups for a community. And I think a lot of our client organizations can potentially learn from that as they start thinking about how to actually go from cohort to community, as it can be a journey. But thank you everybody for today. As we said, we will send the recording out in just a few days. You can watch past events on our website, and we will be back with a force in September after we take a little summer break for this series. So thanks so much, and we'll see you all soon. Have a nice afternoon.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye, guys.